So I'm continuing to analyze the protest footage in Portland, Oregon, and I have a few things that I want to say. While I support the First Amendment and protests that don't disrupt things beyond a reasonable amount, I have always taken a stand against those that participate in actions saying you can't go down this road. And I want to mention that Robert West, I saw him in one of his videos. He actually threatened a woman, and she was black. He actually threatened to smash her window, the window on the side of the car to see the cars behind you, and she started to cry. In another video, which I'm probably going to upload from the media, it shows a blonde woman in a car, and her windshield has been smashed. And this is believed to be a common punishment for cars that attempt to drive through the crowd. Oftentimes you see younger women also being used as pawns, if you will. And I think that's really dangerous and it's really disrespectful, especially when, you could be blocking someone not only from an important engagement or appointment or like getting to work or the hospital. You can also be stopping the vehicle of someone that supports your cause. Literally demonizing protesters like you're some kind of agent provocateur. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of people believe that most of them are agent provocateurs or paid by Soros. The reality is, if you've known some of these folks, if you know the protest culture, and you know that it's gone this direction with people, and there could be on the higher up level talking points and put out there, hey, this is what we do, we storm the freeways, but a lot of people on the organic level, they really do think that's the way you protest in today's day and age. It's not something that's new. It happened in Portland in 2003, and I thought it was a little bit ridiculous then. I've mentioned this before, was called a fascist because my friend Gunnar and I were looking at the crowd like, they were idiots. And I became someone that was very prominent in the anti-war movement in the extent that during the Bush administration, I started my TV show Outside the Box. And I could also be seen with a megaphone, but I wasn't necessarily trying to incite crowds, although there was a few times in which I went down to Saturday Market to talk about these never-ending wars, and this was before Obama was even elected. And when Obama was elected, I did show up at a few events reminding people that change really wasn't here. So my particular tactics were very, very different, as well as those that I ran with. Now times have changed. Things have gotten a little bit more risky, very insane, and then there's lots of evidence of anti-Trump protesters fighting amongst themselves. And so this really is a reflection of our culture. I also want to say there's a number of demonstrations in Portland. They're not all related to Trump. Some of them have been related to the homeless. Some of them have been related to the police chief or the police union contract. And what I want to say is, for someone that did a show in Portland for nearly a decade and went back to Portland, I'll be brief, with nothing and lived in my vehicle, it isn't right to blame the government per se for the homeless problem. If you have a situation where, everybody is about watching over only themselves, numero uno, then you have a social problem. There really shouldn't be decent drug-free young men, especially if they've contributed to the alternative media, left in the street for dead. Now, I survived that because of what I do here on YouTube, and I ended up having the means to get out of Portland forever. But what about those that don't have that type of online support? And it did come from those online. What about people that have been forgotten? I'd like to help homeless if I could, and just, hey, here's a flip cam like the one I'm holding now. You can tell your story and talk about what you're going through and your trials and tribulations. And as you look back on what you went through, it'll make you feel a lot better about yourself. Anyways, there's a lot of people out there that say they're homeless advocates. And the reality is, it sounds like they're just asking for the government to fix everything for them. And there's a society, for the most part, that doesn't even trust its own community members. But again, they're going to keep pointing the finger and the blame at the police and the government. And that's not fair. Is it really the police officer's job to run around with a blanket and make sure no one's freezing to death? I would say that falls on the community. And some would say there is no responsibility part of the community. Everybody out for themselves. But if we are talking about compassion for those with less, where are these groups gathering to actually do something about it? And you don't help the homeless by just giving them a sandwich and a blanket, nor telling them to go apply for welfare. If only we had a more evolved society, people wouldn't fall through the cracks as easily as they do. Another thing I want to mention is there was a protest leader, self-proclaimed, a lot of this is ego-driven with some of these individuals, and they're not genuine members of the anti-war movement. They're really rising to the surface to act like they're superstars. Like you had an actual couple of friends, a gay guy and a gay girl, and they're sitting there forcing the police to pull them, to pry them apart. This was after Trump was initially selected. And I say selected because he's a selection. I'm not a Trump fan, but I will criticize some of these ridiculous behaviors and people acting like they're victims when they're not the Muslims or the Middle Eastern humans being bombed back to the Stone Age. And I see no evidence that Trump is going to create some sort of a police state, especially for the LGBT community. I mean, that is ridiculous. And that's also almost mean-spirited. I can understand the protests regarding the immigration ban. It's how you protest. It's what you do. It's how you represent yourself. So we now have multiple incidents of property damage and situations where some people get attacked at some of these rallies. And we can even see, protesters themselves fighting amongst themselves and ongoing chaos ensuing, and one group against another. In this case, you have the Christian preachers, and you have, although they're not very Christian, they don't come with Bibles. There's actually one man in the crowd calling them out, saying, "Where's your Bible?" So certain things that happen at some of these events are worth covering, but ultimately it's a travesty when people go along with the psychology that you have to shut everything down, that you have to use force, and that's not really all that anarchist, because anarchy is about no masters, no rulers. So Portland is really an epicenter of counterfeit anarchists that believe that they have the right to use force, just like former friend of mine, Mike Smith, and I believe that his mentality, as well as being a statist, because if you're using lawsuits and if you're suing the city and if you're writing to the federal government every time that you have an issue with the Portland police just to use the judicial system against Portland, I think a lot of that's going to change now under Trump. I'm not saying it's necessarily a better thing. But Obama did his role to act like he was going to bring accountability to police departments. And in reality, we've seen more of an incremental federalization process. And so as we've seen the lawsuits against the Portland police, for example, to talk about this specific example, we see people looking to the federal government for help, while in some cases calling themselves anarchists. Well, what kind of an anarchist files paperwork and goes to the feds? What kind of anarchist that truly believes in no masters, no rulers is going to stop traffic and tell someone with the use of force that they can't go down that road, even if that person agrees with them, threatening their property, threatening their car, and literally terrifying them with people around them in every direction? There's literally no compassion for other people, is what I'm seeing at some of these protests that want to drive down the street. It's almost as if they're considered the enemy for being drivers at that moment and not actually being out in the streets. And so in a way, you have a growing left-sided tiptoe of fascism, which is going to lead us into the next election. So those are my thoughts on that. And I hope some people that are involved in some of this irresponsible behavior take what I say to heart and start upgrading some of their tactics if they want to be taken seriously.